I used to think love had a sound. For my mother, it sounded like my brother Daniel's name. Daniel, sweetheart. Daniel, have you eaten? Daniel, you deserve the best. My name, Lena, floated somewhere in the background like elevator music, functional, polite, forgettable. I'm the older sister, 3 years older, technically, but in our house, Daniel was the sun, and I was the planet expected to orbit him quietly. We grew up in a small blue house at the edge of town, the kind with peeling paint and stubborn rose bushes that bloomed no matter how harsh the winter had been. My father died when I was 10, a heart attack, sudden and cruel. After that, my mother shrank into herself, but only halfway. The part of her that folded inward never seemed to affect the way she loved Daniel. He was her miracle baby, born after 2 miscarriages, born after years of prayers, born small and fragile and clinging. I was born first. There's a difference. I learned early that love, in our house, was something you earned through excellence or obedience. Daniel needed neither. He was loved for breathing. I was loved for achieving. When Daniel forgot his homework, Mom drove it to school. When I forgot mine once, just once, she said, "You're the responsible one, Lena. Don't disappoint me." When Daniel broke a lamp playing inside, she laughed. Boys will be boys. When I broke a glass while washing dishes, she sighed like the world had cracked in two. "You're always so careless." I wasn't careless. I was just tired. There's a quiet art to becoming invisible. You learn to shrink your excitement when you get good news. You learn not to expect applause. You learn that birthdays are different when you're not the favorite. On Daniel's 16th birthday, Mom rented out the community hall. There were balloons in his favorite deep blue, a 3-tiered cake, a rented photo booth. She wore a new dress. She cried while giving a speech about how proud she was. On my 16th birthday, we had dinner at home. She forgot to light the candles until I reminded her. She didn't mean to hurt me. That's what I told myself. Intent matters, right? But impact matters more. I remember the day I was accepted into the state university on a partial scholarship. I ran home with the letter clutched to my chest, heart bursting. I'd worked 2 part-time jobs. I'd studied at night until my eyes burned. I wanted her to be proud. She looked at the letter, smiled briefly, and said, "That's nice, but Daniel's football scout is coming this weekend. We need to focus." Focus. Daniel's average grades and mediocre athletic skills still earned her devotion like he was destined for the Olympics. My academic honors were convenient. She'd say, "You're independent." It wasn't praise. It was permission to neglect me. I left for university with 2 suitcases and a promise to myself. I would not spend my life waiting for crumbs. The campus was alive with possibility. Red brick buildings, maple trees that flamed gold in autumn, people who didn't know me as Daniel's sister. For the first time, I was just Lena. I studied literature and communications. I fell in love with stories, the way they could hold pain and beauty in the same breath. I worked in the campus library. I made friends who celebrated my birthday without reminders. When I called home, Mom always asked about Daniel first. "Did he call you? He's thinking of switching majors." "Daniel's stressed. Daniel needs money for books." I sent money sometimes, even when I had barely enough for groceries, because being the responsible one doesn't switch off just because you move away. But something in me began to harden, not into bitterness, but into clarity. I didn't need to compete for love. I just needed to build my own life. Daniel didn't become a football star. He didn't become much of anything, if I'm honest. He switched majors 3 times, dropped out once, moved back home twice. Each time, Mom opened the door like he was a war hero returning from battle. "He just needs support," she'd say. When I graduated with honors, she couldn't attend because Daniel had a difficult week. When I landed my first job at a small publishing house in the city, she said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," but her voice was distracted. I stopped expecting more, and strangely, that freed me. I built a life in a small apartment with tall windows and mismatched furniture. I learned to cook properly. I dated cautiously. I made friends who felt like chosen family. Mom and I spoke less often. Our conversations were polite, surface level. I never confronted her, because what would I say? "You didn't love me enough?" She'd deny it. She'd say, "You're imagining things." So I swallowed it, like I always had. The call came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Daniel's voice was tight. "Mom's in the hospital." Everything inside me went still. Cancer. Aggressive. Late stage. I drove 3 hours that night, rain streaking across the windshield like the sky was trying to erase the road. When I walked into her hospital room, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, not just physically, but spiritually, like some invisible scaffolding had been removed. Her eyes softened when she saw me. "Lena," she whispered, and in that moment, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was just her child. I stayed for weeks. I took unpaid leave. I organized medications, spoke to doctors, cooked meals for Daniel when he couldn't handle it. He cried often. Mom held his hand, but sometimes when he left the room, she looked at me with something unfamiliar. Regret. "Have I been a good mother?" she asked one night. The question hovered between us like fragile glass. I could have told the truth. I could have unleashed years of ache. Instead, I said, "You did your best," because maybe she had, even if her best broke me a little. In her final weeks, something shifted. She began to ask me about my work, really asking, "What do you edit? What kind of stories do you like? Are you happy, Lena?" No one had ever asked me that with such sincerity. "Are you happy?" "I'm learning to be," I said. She squeezed my hand. "You were always stronger than me," she murmured one afternoon. It startled me. I had never considered her weak. Biased, yes. Blind, perhaps, but not weak. "I was afraid," she said one afternoon, voice thin as tissue paper. "After your father died, I held on to Daniel too tightly. He needed me. You didn't." That sentence pierced deeper than any insult ever had. You needed me? Of course I had. I was just better at pretending. Tears blurred my vision. "I needed you too," I whispered. She closed her eyes. "I know." It wasn't a dramatic apology. There was no cinematic confession. But it was something. And sometimes something is enough to begin healing. She passed away on a Sunday morning. The sun streamed through the hospital blinds, gentle and golden, as if the world was trying to soften the goodbye. Daniel collapsed into himself. I held everything together. The funeral was small, quiet, respectful. And then came the will. I didn't think about it much. I assumed the house would go to Daniel, maybe the savings too. It made sense. He still lived there. He always had. We sat in a modest lawyer's office 3 weeks later. The air smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Daniel looked confident, certain. The lawyer cleared his throat. "As per Mrs. Eleanor Hayes' final testament," I folded my hands in my lap and prepared to hear confirmation of what I'd always known. I was second. But then, "I leave the house, all savings, and my life insurance policy to my daughter, Lena Hayes." Silence. It rang in my ears. Daniel blinked. "What?" he snapped. The lawyer continued calmly. "I leave my son, Daniel Hayes, the car and a personal letter." Daniel's face turned red. "This is wrong. There's a mistake." There wasn't. The documents were signed, witnessed,
updated 2 months before her passing. 2 months, when she'd started asking me if I was happy, when she'd begun to see me. My hands trembled. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't wanted revenge. I hadn't even wanted validation in the form of property. But there it was, proof. Not that she loved me more, but that she finally understood. Daniel stormed out of the office. I stayed seated. The lawyer handed me an envelope. She wanted you to have this separately, he said. My name was written in her delicate, familiar script. Lena. Not in the background, not as an afterthought, just my name. I opened it with shaking fingers and began to read.
My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, then I have already said goodbye in the only way I could manage, quietly, without asking for more time I did not have. There are things a mother should say while she is still breathing. I was never very brave with my words, so I am borrowing courage from this paper. You were my first heartbeat outside my body. When you were born, I remember staring at you and thinking, how can something so small already feel wiser than me? You had these watchful eyes. You didn't cry much. The nurses said you were easy. I made a terrible mistake with that word, easy. When your father died, I broke in ways I never showed you. The world felt unstable. I was terrified of losing more. Daniel was fragile. He clung to me. He demanded me. And I let that demand convince me it was love. You did not demand. You endured. I mistook your strength for independence. I mistook your silence for lack of need. I mistook your resilience for immunity. And so I poured my fear into protecting the child who seemed breakable, while the one who carried the heavier weight stood quietly beside me. I see it now. I saw it too late, but I saw it. The house is yours not because I love you more. It is yours because you built your life without leaning on me. It is yours because you never asked for what you deserved. It is yours because I want, for once, to give you something without you earning it first. I was wrong, Lena. You needed me, and I am so sorry I did not notice. Love does not divide evenly when fear is in charge, but love is not a pie, and I learned that too late. I loved you fiercely. I simply loved you poorly. Please do not carry bitterness forward. Let it end with me. Daniel will struggle. He always has. If you can help him, do, but not at the cost of yourself. Do not become small again to make someone else comfortable. You are not background music. You are the song. I am proud of you in ways I never learned to say out loud. With all the love I failed to show properly. Mom. The words blurred as tears slipped down my cheeks, landing softly on the paper. I didn't sob. I didn't collapse. I just breathed. For the first time in my life, I felt seen by her. Not compared. Not evaluated. Seen. The lawyer's office faded into a quiet hum around me. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases flat like I was sealing something sacred back into place. Outside, the sky was bright and unapologetically blue. Daniel was pacing near his car when I stepped out. This is insane, he snapped. She promised the house would be mine. I searched his face, not for anger, but for the little boy who used to hide behind her legs. She changed her mind, I said gently. You manipulated her. The accusation stung less than I expected. I didn't, I replied, and I didn't. He looked lost. For the first time, Daniel didn't look like the golden child. He looked scared. And suddenly, I understood something else my mother hadn't been able to articulate. Being favored had not made him strong. It had made him dependent. I moved back into the house a month later, not because I wanted to reclaim childhood territory, but because I needed to decide what to do with it. The rose bushes were still there, stubborn and blooming. The paint was more chipped now. The porch creaked in familiar places. Inside, everything smelled like her. Lavender and old books. I walked slowly through each room, letting memory rise and fall like tidewater. The kitchen where I had washed dishes carefully, trying not to break anything. The living room where Daniel opened piles of Christmas presents while I smiled and clapped. My old bedroom, smaller than I remembered, sunlight pooling softly on the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself grieve,
not just for her death, but for the childhood I had shaped myself around. Grief is strange. It doesn't only mourn what was, it mourns what wasn't. Daniel called 2 weeks later. I need to talk. His voice had lost its edge. We met at a small cafe halfway between the house and his apartment. He looked tired, like someone who had just discovered the ground wasn't as solid as he thought. I found the letter she left me, he said quietly. And? He swallowed. She said she worried she made me weak. The words hung heavy. She said she should have let me fail more, let me stand on my own. I didn't say she was right. I just listened. He rubbed his hands together. I thought she believed in me more than you. That one was harder. She did believe in you, I said carefully, but she believed I didn't need her. He looked at me then, really looked at me. I never realized, he said. I smiled faintly. That makes 2 of us. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile, it was thoughtful. I don't want to fight you over the house, he said finally. I just don't tell who I am without her managing everything. And there it was. The cost of being the favorite. No one had taught him how to walk alone. I made a decision that night. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. The house was too large for one person, too full of ghosts for me to rebuild inside it as it was. So I sold it. Daniel was shocked at first. You're just letting it go. I'm not letting it go, I said. I'm transforming it. With the money I paid off my student loans, I invested in my own small publishing consultancy, something I dreamed about for years but I'd never dared to risk. And I set aside a portion for Daniel, not handed to him freely, but placed in a structured account that required financial planning and responsibility. He was furious, then embarrassed, then slowly grateful. I guess this is what tough love looks like, he admitted one afternoon. Yes, I said softly, it is. Months passed. I moved into a smaller home filled with light. I painted the walls a soft sage green. I planted new rose bushes in the yard, not because they were hers, but because I liked how stubbornly they bloomed. My business grew. I worked with emerging writers, helping them shape stories about resilience and rediscovery. There was something poetic about that. Daniel found a steady job. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't heroic, but it was his. One evening, he came over for dinner. He brought dessert, store-bought, slightly lopsided, but offered with shy pride. You seem different, he said as we sat on the porch. Different how? Lighter. I thought about that. I forgave her, I said. Completely. Not completely, I admitted, but enough. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a series of small releases. I released the comparison. I released the scoreboard. I released the need to prove I was worthy, because I always had been. A year after her death, I visited her grave alone. The cemetery was quiet, the grass brushed silver by morning dew. I knelt and traced her name carved into stone. I needed you, I whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees. And I forgive you. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder, no cinematic swell. Just a quiet truth laid gently between earth and sky. I realized then that the will hadn't been about money. It had been about recognition, about her final attempt to rebalance a scale she had tipped for decades. It didn't erase the past, but it rewrote the ending, and sometimes that is enough. I walked away from the grave not as the overlooked daughter, not as the responsible one, not as the second choice, but as a woman who understood that being unseen once does not mean you are invisible forever. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read, but by then I no longer needed to be, because I had already learned how to choose myself.
I thought that would be the end of it. Closure wrapped neatly in forgiveness. A poetic symmetry to a life that had once felt lopsided. But healing doesn't move in straight lines. It circles back. It tests you. 3 months after the first anniversary of my mother's death, I received a call from her old neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez. "Lena, sweetheart," she said gently, "there's something you should see." I drove over that afternoon. The house had already been renovated by the new owners. The blue paint was gone, replaced with a modern gray. The rose bushes I'd left behind had been trimmed into disciplined shapes. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt distant. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting by the fence, holding a small wooden box. "I found this in my attic," she explained. "Your mother gave it to me years ago, said it was for safekeeping. I forgot about it until I was cleaning." My heart tightened. "For me?" She said, "Give it to Lena when she's ready." When she's ready. I didn't know how my mother would have measured that, but I took the box. It was light, old, the latch slightly rusted. I waited until I got home to open it. Inside were photographs, not of Daniel, of me. Stacks of them. Me in a paper crown at age 5, me holding a science fair ribbon, me asleep on the couch with a book open on my chest. There were report cards, newspaper clippings, even a crayon drawing I barely remembered making. At the bottom was a small journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. It was a collection of short entries, dates, observations. Lena read her first book by herself today. She didn't even ask for help. Lena didn't cry when she fell. She brushed herself off. I worry she thinks she has to be brave all the time. Lena gave Daniel her last cookie. I don't know if she realizes how much she gives. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by proof that my mother had been watching me all along, quietly, privately. There were dozens of entries. I don't tell Lena enough how proud I am of her. She seems so certain. I'm afraid I will disrupt her strength if I hover. I hope she knows I see her. The words cracked something open inside me. She had seen me. She just hadn't known how to reach me, and I hadn't known how to ask. Two strong, stubborn women loving each other imperfectly across a widening gap. I pressed the journal to my chest and let myself cry, not for what was missing, but for what was hidden. Love misplaced, but real. The discovery changed something subtle but profound. It softened the sharpest edges of my childhood memories, not erased them, but reframed them. When Daniel came over that weekend, I showed him the box. He flipped through the photos slowly. "I don't think I've ever seen these," he admitted. "I don't think she meant for you to." He studied one picture of me at 12, grinning with missing teeth, holding a spelling bee trophy. "She should have told you," he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. She should have. But I also understood now that my mother was a woman shaped by her own fears. Her own upbringing had been cold, achievement-focused, affection rationed. Emotional fluency had never been taught to her. It didn't excuse the imbalance, but it explained it, and explanation is a powerful antidote to resentment. As my business grew, I found myself drawn to mentoring young women, brilliant ones, quiet ones, the kind who excelled without asking for applause. I recognized them instantly. One afternoon, a college intern named Maya stayed late. She was meticulous, talented, and allergic to praise. "You did excellent work on this manuscript," I told her. She shrugged. "I just did what was expected." The words hit me like an echo from my own past. "Expected isn't the same as ordinary," I said gently. "You're allowed to take up space." Her eyes shimmered slightly, like no one had ever told her that before. In that moment, I realized something beautiful. The cycle had ended. I was not repeating what had wounded me. I was transforming it. Daniel surprised me a year later. He enrolled in night classes, business management. "I want to understand money," he said sheepishly, "not just rely on it appearing." I smiled. "I'm proud of you." He blinked, almost startled. Pride was once currency giving only to him, but rarely spoken aloud in that simple way. We were learning each other as adults now, without the shadow of comparison, without our mother standing between us as judge and protector. Just two flawed humans untangling inherited patterns. On the second anniversary of her death, Daniel and I visited the cemetery together. He placed white lilies. I brought a single red rose. We stood in silence for a while. "I used to think being the favorite meant I mattered more," he said eventually. "Now I think it just meant she was afraid to lose me." I nodded. "She loved us both," I said, "just differently. And imperfectly." Yes. We didn't need to rank that love anymore. It had shaped us, but it did not define us. That evening, I returned home and opened her journal again. There was one final entry written in shakier handwriting than the rest. "If Lena ever reads this, I hope she knows she was never second in my heart.
only in my expression, and that is my greatest regret. I traced the ink gently. Second in expression, not in heart. I thought about all the children who grow up misinterpreting silence, all the daughters who believe competence cancels need, all the mothers who love fiercely but fail to show it clearly. We are all fumbling in some way, learning too late what should have been said sooner. But here's what I know now. Being overlooked taught me how to see. Being under-celebrated taught me how to affirm. Being second taught me how to choose myself first. The will was not a reward, it was a reckoning, not just for her, for me. Because when the lawyer read her words that day, something invisible shifted, not the balance of assets, the balance of truth. And in that shift, I stopped being the girl in the background. I became the author of my own life. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But by then, I had already learned that love is not proven by inheritance. It is proven by what you build after the reading ends. And I built a life rooted not in comparison, but in courage, not in scarcity, but in quiet, steady worth. If I ever have a daughter one day, I will tell her, out loud, what my mother wrote too late. I see you. You don't have to be strong to deserve love. You don't have to earn it. You already have it. And that will be the inheritance that matters most.
For a long time, I believed the story had resolved itself neatly. Mother dies, will is read, truth is revealed, daughter heals. But real life doesn't bow at the end of a chapter. It keeps moving. And sometimes the real test of forgiveness begins after the dramatic moments have passed, when no one is watching, when the applause fades, when you are alone with old reflexes that still try to rise. About 3 years after my mother's death, Daniel lost his job. Not because he failed spectacularly, because the company downsized. He called me at 10:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because I stared at the clock before answering, bracing myself for who I might have to become again. "Hey," he said, voice hollow. "I didn't want to tell you, but I got laid off." I felt the old instinct flicker. Step in, fix it, carry him. It was the role I'd played since childhood, the responsible one, the steady one, the one who absorbed the shock. But this time I paused. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "That's hard." Silence crackled through the line. "I don't want to move backward," he whispered. There it was, the fear. Not of losing money, of losing identity. And suddenly I saw my mother in him again, not the favoritism, but the fear of instability, the terror of losing control. "You won't," I said. "You've built skills now. You're not the same person you were. I don't know how to do this without someone managing it." It would have been easy to take over, to review his resume, to call contacts, to make decisions for him. Instead, I asked, "What do you think your first step should be?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, he answered. And I listened. That night, something subtle but powerful happened. I didn't rescue him, and he didn't collapse. The next few months were not graceful. He doubted himself often. He wanted reassurance constantly. But instead of shielding him from discomfort, I stood beside him through it. There is a difference. One Sunday afternoon, while helping him practice interview questions, he stopped mid-sentence. "You know," he said, studying me carefully, "if things had been reversed, I don't think I would have handled everything the way you did when Mom died." I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" "You didn't throw it in my face. You didn't make the will about winning." I thought about that. Winning. As if love were a competition with trophies. "I didn't want to win," I said quietly. "I just wanted peace." He nodded slowly, like that answer was heavier than he expected. Around that time, something unexpected happened in my own life. I fell in love. Not the dramatic, dizzy kind of love I'd imagined in my 20s, but the steady, sun-warmed kind. His name was Adrian. He was a landscape architect, patient, observant, with hands that always smelled faintly of soil and cedarwood.
We met at a community fundraiser for a literacy program I supported. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he spoke. On our third date, he said, "You carry yourself like someone who learned early not to ask for too much." The words caught me off guard. "Is that a criticism?" I asked lightly. "No," he said gently. "It's an observation. But I hope you're learning you're allowed to." Allowed to. Such a simple phrase. Yet it felt revolutionary. As our relationship deepened, I noticed how often I defaulted to self-sufficiency. If I was sick, I minimized it. If I was stressed, I downplayed it. If I needed comfort, I told myself I could manage. One evening, after a particularly exhausting week, I broke down in his kitchen over something small, a publishing contract that had fallen through. "I should have anticipated it," I muttered through tears. "I should have done more." Adrian stepped closer. "Or," he said softly, "you could let it be disappointing without making it your fault." I froze. That sentence slipped into a part of me that had always believed mistakes equaled worth. He wrapped his arms around me, and for once I didn't resist being held. It felt unfamiliar. It felt dangerous. It felt safe. Healing, I've learned, is not just about forgiving others. It's about updating the story you tell yourself. For years, my internal narrative had been, you are strong because you have to be. You are loved because you perform. You are safe because you handle everything alone. But love does not demand isolation. Strength does not require silence. And safety can exist in shared weight. I began practicing small acts of vulnerability. Telling Adrian when I was tired, asking Daniel for help assembling bookshelves instead of doing it alone, letting friends show up for me. It felt awkward at first, like learning a language I should have known fluently by now. But slowly, the old tension in my shoulders softened. Daniel eventually found a new job. Smaller company, less prestige, but healthier environment. The night he signed the contract, he came over with a bottle of inexpensive champagne. "To not moving backward," he toasted. "To moving honestly," I corrected with a smile. He looked around my living room, the soft lighting, the overflowing bookshelves, Adrian's jacket draped casually over a chair. "You built something solid," I replied. And for once, there was no shadow of comparison between us, just mutual recognition. The biggest surprise came 5 years after my mother's passing. Adrian proposed under a canopy of string lights in our backyard, the air warm and fragrant with blooming jasmine. I said yes without hesitation. As we began planning the wedding, I found myself staring at a blank line on the guest list. Mother of the bride. The space felt both empty and peaceful. I visited her grave alone before the ceremony. "I wish you could see this," I whispered. "I think you'd like him." The wind stirred gently, brushing my hair across my face. "I'm not angry anymore," I added. "I'm grateful. Grateful for the lessons, even the painful ones. Grateful that the story didn't end in bitterness. Grateful that her final act had not divided us, but forced us to confront truths we might have avoided forever." On my wedding day, Daniel walked me down the aisle. Not because tradition required it, but because we chose it. Halfway down the path, he squeezed my arm. "She would be proud," he murmured. I believed him. Not because she favored me in the end, but because she had grown enough before she left to try to repair what she had broken. Growth, even late, still counts. Years later, when I held my newborn daughter for the first time, I understood something in my bones. Love is terrifying. It makes you want to protect, to hover, to overcorrect, to cling. I felt the instinct immediately, the desire to guard her from every disappointment, every bruise, every heartbreak. And then I remembered, overprotection can look like love, but it can also become fear in disguise. So I made a quiet promise as I rocked her in the dim hospital room. I will not confuse your strength for lack of need. I will not ration affection because you seem capable. I will say it out loud. "I love you," I whispered into her tiny ear. "Not because you're good, not because you're strong, just because you're you." Tears slipped down my face as she slept against my chest. Cycles can end. Patterns can soften. Favoritism can transform into fairness. Silence can become language. Sometimes people ask me if the will changed everything. It didn't. It revealed everything. The imbalance had always been there. The love had always been there too. The will simply forced the truth into the light. And once something is illuminated, you can choose what to do with it. I chose not to weaponize it. I chose not to measure worth by inheritance. I chose to build forward instead of backward. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But the real inheritance wasn't the house. It was the clarity, the apology, the opportunity to end a generational pattern of loving quietly instead of clearly. Now when my daughter runs into my arms, I hold her without hesitation.
When she achieves something, I celebrate loudly. When she fails, I kneel beside her. And when she looks at me with those watchful, wise eyes, I make sure she never has to guess. I see you, I tell her, every single time. Because no child should have to wait for a will to feel chosen.
Motherhood did not arrive wrapped in certainty. It arrived in the middle of the night, with exhaustion and doubt, and a crying infant who didn't care about generational healing or emotional insight. She just cared that she was hungry. Her name is Eliza. When she was 2, she developed a fierce streak of independence. She insisted on putting on her own shoes, even when they were on the wrong feet. She wanted to carry her own tiny backpack. She refused help climbing the playground ladder. One afternoon, as I watched her struggle with a stubborn zipper, I almost said it. "You're fine. You don't need me." The words hovered at the back of my throat. And then I felt a chill. That sentence, the same one that had quietly shaped my childhood. Instead, I knelt beside her. "Do you want help?" I asked softly. "Or do you want me to wait while you try?" She looked at me, considering. "Wait," she decided. So I waited. Not because she didn't need me, but because she deserved the choice. It seems small. It is not. As Eliza grew older, I became hyper-aware of balance. If she excelled in something, I celebrated her effort, not her superiority. If she struggled, I didn't rush to fix it, but I stayed close enough that she knew I could. One evening, when she was 7, she crawled into my lap and asked, "Mama, who was your mama like?" Children have a way of stepping directly into the tender spaces. I inhaled slowly. "She loved me," I said, "but she didn't always know how to show it in the right way." Eliza traced the lines on my palm thoughtfully. "Did that make you sad?" "Yes," I admitted. "Sometimes." "Do you still love her?" "Yes." Her forehead wrinkled. "Even if she made mistakes?" "Especially then." Eliza seemed satisfied with that answer. Children often are when the truth is simple and unguarded. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone on the porch and thought about the complexity of it all. Love and harm can coexist. Good intentions can still wound. And forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing not to let the wound dictate the rest of your story. Daniel became an uncle who tried. Not perfectly, but intentionally. He showed up to Eliza's school recital with flowers that were far too big for her small arms. He taught her how to ride a bike and ran behind her longer than he probably needed to, just to make sure she felt steady. One afternoon, after she had fallen and scraped her knee, Daniel scooped her up instinctively. "It's okay," he said quickly. "You're strong." I watched him freeze mid-sentence. He looked at me. We both heard it. The echo. He swallowed and corrected himself. "You're strong," he said again, more slowly. "And it's okay that this hurts." Eliza buried her face in his shoulder and cried. He held her. Didn't rush her. Didn't dismiss it. Later, when we were alone in the kitchen, he exhaled heavily. "I almost did it again." "I know," I said gently. He leaned against the counter. "Do you ever worry you'll repeat everything without meaning to?" "All the time." And I pay attention," I said. "That's the difference. Awareness is the quiet revolution." When Eliza turned 10, we visited my mother's grave together for the first time. The cemetery was peaceful, sunlight filtering through tall oaks. Eliza held my hand, skipping slightly to keep up with my stride. "Is this where your mama sleeps?" "Yes." She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the headstone. "I brought her these," she announced proudly, "because she helped make you, and you made me." The simplicity of her logic broke me open. Generations are not straight lines. They are threads woven through each other. Some tangled, some frayed, but still connected. I knelt beside the stone. "She would have loved you," I told Eliza. "Did she love you?" I asked firmly this time. "Yes, she did." Not because of the will, not because of the journal, but because I finally understood something I hadn't when I was young. Love is not always expressed in the way we need, but it can still be real. That truth no longer felt like an excuse. It felt like release. Years passed, as they do quietly when life is full. My publishing consultancy expanded into a small firm. I mentored dozens of young writers, many of whom carried invisible stories of comparison, favoritism, silence. Sometimes during workshops, I would say, being overlooked can sharpen your perception, but don't let it shrink your voice.
I never told them my full story. I didn't need to. It lived in the way I listened, in the way I praised, in the way I refused to let quiet talent remain unseen. Daniel eventually started his own modest financial advisory practice. Nothing flashy, just steady work helping families avoid the kind of dependency that once shaped him. He told clients openly, security isn't about control, it's about preparation. Growth looks different on everyone. For him, it looked like humility. For me, it looked like softness. On the 10th anniversary of my mother's passing, I reread her letter alone in my office. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. You are not background music. You are the song. I smiled. I no longer needed the line to validate me, but I appreciated it. Not as proof of worth, as evidence of her evolution. She had grown before she left, and that mattered. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then I picked up my phone and called Daniel. Coffee? I asked. Always, he replied. We met at the same cafe where we had once sat in stunned silence after the will reading. This time, there was no tension, just familiarity. Do you ever think about that day? Sometimes. What do you think would have happened if she'd split everything evenly? I considered that. I think we would have kept pretending. He nodded slowly. The will had disrupted the illusion. Forced conversations, forced reflection, forced growth. It hadn't been comfortable, but comfort had never changed us. Truth had. If I could speak to my younger self, the girl watching her brother unwrap more presents, I would kneel in front of her and say, you are not less loved. You are less expressed. There is a difference, and one day you will understand it. Not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office, but in the quiet moments when you choose differently. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But the real transformation happened afterward, in the way I loved my daughter, in the way I supported my brother without saving him, in the way I stopped equating silence with strength. Inheritance is not always money. Sometimes it is awareness. Sometimes it is the chance to break a pattern. Sometimes it is the courage to say out loud what previous generations only wrote down. Now, when Eliza curls beside me at night and whispers, Mama, am I your favorite? I smile and kiss her forehead. You're my only, and you are more than enough. She never has to wonder. And that, more than any house, any savings account, any final testament, is the perfect ending to a story that once began in the background. Because I was never meant to stay there. I was meant to step forward. And I did.
There is one more thing I have never said out loud. Not to Daniel, not to Adrian, not even fully to myself. For years, I told this story as one of quiet resilience, of injustice corrected, of a will that revealed a hidden truth. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and Eliza is asleep, and the dishwasher hums softly in the background, another memory surfaces. It is small, almost forgettable. I am 8 years old. Daniel is 5. It is raining outside, the kind of steady gray rain that makes the world feel suspended. I am sitting at the kitchen table drawing. Daniel is in the living room, building something loud and unstable with blocks. He knocks it over. He cries. My mother rushes in immediately. Oh, sweetheart, she says, kneeling beside him. It's okay, Mama's here. I watch from the doorway, not because I need her at that exact moment, but because I want to see what it feels like to be gathered like that. Later that night, I wake from the nightmare. Thunder rattles the windows. My heart is pounding. I walk down the hallway toward her bedroom. I can hear her breathing inside. The door is slightly open. I stand there for a long time. I almost knock, but I don't. I turn around and go back to bed. Not because she wouldn't have opened the door, but because I had already decided I shouldn't need her to. That decision shaped me more than any will ever could. I used to think the tragedy of my childhood was favoritism. Now I understand it was assumption. She assumed I was fine. I assumed I shouldn't ask. 2 misunderstandings quietly reinforcing each other. And that is how distance grows. Not from cruelty, but from silence. A few years ago, when Eliza was 12, she failed a math test. Not disastrously, but enough to shake her confidence. She came home unusually quiet, set her backpack down without drama, avoided eye contact. At dinner, she finally said, I messed up. My chest tightened, not with disappointment, but with recognition.
What happened? I asked. I thought I understood it, she said. I didn't want to ask for help because everyone else seemed to get it. There it was, that old instinct. I reached across the table and took her hand. You never have to prove you don't need help, I said gently. Needing help is not weakness, it's information. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want you to think I wasn't smart. I swallowed hard. Oh, Eliza, I said softly. Your intelligence has nothing to do with whether you struggle. Later that night, after we worked through the math together, she hugged me tightly. Thanks for not being mad, she whispered. Mad, the word echoed. Had I been afraid of anger when I was little, or just afraid of inconvenience? I don't know. But I know this. My daughter knocked on my door that night, and I answered. Daniel and I still talk about our childhood sometimes. Not in bitterness, in curiosity. Once, over coffee, he asked, Do you think Mom would have changed earlier if you'd confronted her? I thought about that for a long time. I don't know, I said honestly, but I don't think I had the language yet. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It's hard to name when there's no overt harm, no yelling, no cruelty, just imbalance. How do you accuse someone of not noticing you enough? How do you prove absence? You don't. You survive it. And if you're lucky, you eventually understand it. When Eliza turned 16, we threw her a party in our backyard. String lights, music, laughter spilling into the warm night air. Daniel stood beside me, watching her dance with her friends. Do you remember my 16th? He asked quietly. I smiled faintly. How could I forget? He winced. It was a lot. It was, I agreed. And yours? Quieter. He shook his head slowly. I didn't see it then. I know. He looked at Eliza again. I'm glad she won't have to. That sentence felt like a quiet triumph. Not because we had rewritten the past, but because we had refused to replicate it. There is a temptation when telling stories like mine to villainize someone, to draw sharp lines, to say she was wrong and I was right. But real families are not courtroom dramas. They are layered, complicated, full of love and blind spots tangled together. My mother loved me. She loved Daniel too. Her mistake wasn't loving one child more. It was expressing love unevenly, and the damage of that imbalance was subtle, but real. The will did not magically fix my childhood. It did something braver. It forced truth into the open. He gave me tangible evidence that she had reflected, that she had wrestled with her own fear, that she had tried at the end to correct what she finally understood. That matters. Growth at the 11th hour still counts as growth. Last winter, Eliza and I were sorting through old boxes in the attic when she found the wooden chest Mrs. Alvarez had returned to me years ago. What's this? She asked. Memories, I said. We sat cross-legged on the floor as I showed her the photographs, the journal, the letter. She read quietly, her brow furrowed. She read about you all the time, Eliza said softly. Yes. Why didn't she tell you? I smiled gently. Sometimes people love in private because they're afraid of doing it wrong in public. Eliza considered that. Would you ever do that to me? No, I said immediately. If I feel proud, I tell you. If I love you, I tell you. If I'm wrong, I tell you. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Then she surprised me. I think she was learning, she said thoughtfully, even if it was late. Children see clearly when we let them. Yes, I whispered. She was. There is one final image I carry with me now. Not the lawyer's office, not the grave, not even the letter. It is the image of my younger self standing outside my mother's bedroom door during a thunderstorm. Hand raised, not knocking. If I could step back into that hallway, I would kneel in front of her and say, You are allowed to knock. You are allowed to need comfort. You are allowed to interrupt someone else's rest or your fear. You are not too strong to deserve softness. I cannot change that night, but I can change every night that comes after it. And I have. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But the deeper truth is this. I stopped waiting to be chosen long before that. I chose myself when I left home. I chose myself when I built a career. I chose myself when I forgave without pretending the heart didn't exist. The will was not the beginning of my worth. It was the confirmation of something I had already learned. Love is not about being favored. It is about being seen. And once you truly see yourself, the hierarchy dissolves. Now, when storms roll in and thunder rattles our windows, Eliza sometimes pads down the hallway and climbs into bed beside me. I wrap my arms around her without hesitation. She never stands outside the door. She never wonders if she should knock. And that is how I know the story has finally fully changed.
Time has a way of turning sharp memories into softer outlines. Not erased, not forgotten, just gentler at the edges. Eliza is 17 now. She walks through the world with a quiet confidence that feels different from the kind I had at her age. Mine was armor, hers is ease. Last week, she came home from school and dropped her bag on the kitchen counter. "Mama," she said casually, slicing an apple, "I didn't get the lead in the play." I looked up. "Oh?" "I got supporting," she shrugged. I was disappointed for like 10 minutes. "Only 10?" I smiled. "Yeah, then I figured I'll make the supporting role unforgettable." She said it without bitterness, without comparison, without shrinking. And something inside me loosened. At 17, I would have measured that outcome against someone else's applause. I would have scanned the room for proof that I was still enough. She simply recalibrated and moved forward. That is what emotional security looks like. It doesn't eliminate disappointment. It prevents it from becoming identity. Later that evening, Adrian and I sat on the porch while Eliza practiced her lines in the living room. "You did that," he said quietly. I shook my head. "We did." But I understood what he meant. Generational change is invisible when you're in it. It feels like small conversations, repeated reassurances, choosing patience over assumption, saying "I'm proud of you" out loud instead of thinking it privately. It feels ordinary until you compare it to what came before. Daniel's life has taken a steady, unexpected shape too. He married a woman named Claire, a social worker with sharp humor and a soft heart. They have a little boy, Noah, who inherited Daniel's stubborn chin and Claire's perceptive eyes. The first time I watched Daniel comfort Noah after a scraped elbow, I held my breath. Noah wailed dramatically, tiny hands clenched. Daniel scooped him up. "I know it hurts," he said calmly. That was a big fall. No dismissal, no minimizing, no rushing, just presence. "I'm right here," Daniel added. I blinked back tears. Later, I teased her lightly. "Look at you, emotional literacy." He laughed. "Don't make it weird." But his eyes softened. "She got some things wrong," he said quietly. "I don't have to." Neither of us needed to say her name. She lives in these moments now, not as a shadow, but as a lesson. There are still days when grief ambushes me. It arrives unexpectedly, like when I see a mother and daughter shopping together, heads bent in shared laughter. Or when I accomplish something significant and instinctively reach for my phone before remembering there's no one on the other end who remembers me at 5, at 10, at 16. Grief is not linear, but it is no longer heavy. It feels like a gentle ache, a reminder of what mattered. On the 15th anniversary of her death, I did something I had never done before. I read her letter aloud, not at the grave, at my dining table. Daniel was there, Claire, Adrian, Eliza, even little Noah, fidgeting beside his father. I wanted the words to exist in air, not just on paper. When I reached the line, "You are not background music, you are the song," my voice wavered slightly. Eliza reached across the table and squeezed my hand. When I finished, there was silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "She was learning," he said again, like he had years before. "Yes," I agreed. She was. Claire looked thoughtful. "It takes courage to admit you got something wrong." "It does," I said. "And even more courage," Adrian added gently, "to forgive it." I looked around the table, at my brother who once stood at the center of everything, now content to share space, at my daughter who has never once questioned whether she is wanted, at my husband who reminds me that strength and softness can coexist. And I realized something profound. The will was never the climax of my story. It was the turning point. The moment where I could have hardened, could have weaponized proof, could have let validation arrive too late to matter. Instead, I let it soften me. That choice changed everything. A few months ago, Eliza asked if she could read the journal alone. She deserves to know where she comes from, I told Adrian. So I handed it to her one quiet Sunday afternoon. She sat by the window for hours, turning pages slowly. When she finished, she came into my office. "Mama?" "Yes." "I think she loved you as loudly as she knew how." The words caught in my throat. "That's a beautiful way to put it," I managed. Eliza nodded. "But you love louder." I laughed softly, tears patterning. "I learned," I said. "That's the part no one talks about enough. Healing isn't about pretending the hurt didn't shape you. It's about deciding how it will." Sometimes I imagine my mother watching us, not in a mystical way, just in the way memory watches. I imagine her seeing Daniel kneel beside his son, seeing Eliza walk into a room without shrinking, seeing me speak openly about need and pride and love.
I imagined she would feel both regret and relief. Regret for what she missed, relief for what didn't repeat. And I think she would understand now what I didn't as a child. Love is not proven by who receives more. It is proven by who grows because of it. Even imperfect love can plant seeds, but it takes intention to water them differently. If you ask me now whether I was my mother's favorite child, I no longer feel the sting of that question. The hierarchy doesn't exist anymore. There is no podium, no ranking. Just two children shaped by one woman's strengths and fears, and one woman, me, who decided the shaping would not be the final form. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But the truth beneath that headline is quieter and far more powerful. I stopped needing to be the favorite. I started needing to be whole. And I am. Not because she chose me in the end, but because I chose myself long before that. And then I chose my daughter. And my brother chose his son. And just like that, a story that once began with imbalance now continues with intention. The background music became a symphony, and no one has to strain to hear it anymore.
There is something else I've come to understand. Years after the will, years after the letter, years after the first time I said out loud, "I forgive you." Healing does not erase the child you once were. She still lives inside you. She still watches. She still remembers. The difference is, she is no longer alone. Last spring, I attended Eliza's graduation. She walked across the stage with her chin high, sunlight catching in her hair, applause rising around her like a wave she didn't need to chase. When her name was called, I stood immediately. I clapped loudly. Not politely, not moderately. Loudly. Adrian laughed beside me. "We can all hear you." "Good," I said, not lowering my hands. Because somewhere deep inside, a younger version of me was standing in a different auditorium, holding a certificate while scanning the crowd for a face that looked fully present. And this time, she found it. After the ceremony, Eliza ran toward us. "You were the loudest," she grinned. "Always," I said. "Get used to it." She hugged me tight. "I never have to wonder if you're proud of me," she whispered. The words sank into me slowly. I never have to wonder. That is what I once longed for without knowing how to articulate it. Certainty. Not perfection, not favoritism. Certainty. A few months later, I received an unexpected email. It was from the lawyer who had handled my mother's will. He was retiring. While organizing old files, he found something misfiled. Attached was a scanned copy of a handwritten note from my mother, dated just days before she finalized the will. It was not addressed to me. It wasn't even polished. It looked like a draft. I hope Lena understands someday that my fear was louder than my fairness. I hope she does better than I did. I read that line 3 times. My fear was louder than my fairness. That was it. That was the entire story distilled into one sentence. She had not loved Daniel more. She had feared losing him more. Fear had distorted her balance. And I, in my quiet competence, had seemed safe enough to absorb the difference. It was flawed. It was human. It was real. I printed the note and placed it inside the wooden box with the others. Not as proof, as context. Daniel and I talk about fear differently now. One evening, sitting on my porch while our children chased fireflies in the yard, he said, "I used to think Mom loved me more. Now I think she was just more afraid for me." I nodded. "And you?" he asked. "I think she trusted me more," I said slowly. "But she forgot that trust doesn't replace tenderness." He exhaled. "That's good." "What is?" "That you can say that without anger." It surprised me how true that was. There is no anger left, only understanding. And sometimes, understanding feels like the most radical act of all. Eliza leaves for college in the fall. We've been packing slowly, sorting through her childhood room, deciding what to keep, what to let go. Yesterday, she found an old drawing she made when she was 5. It was of our family, 3 stick figures holding hands under an oversized sun. "Did you ever draw pictures like this when you were little?" she asked. "I did," I smiled, "though I don't remember anyone saving them." She studied me for a moment. "Do you wish she had?" I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said finally, because even if she didn't save the drawings, she saved her thoughts. I just found them later. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think she'd be proud of you now?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. Not because of the house, not because of the business, not because of the way things looked from the outside,
but because I did what she hoped I would. I did better where she couldn't. And that is not betrayal. It is evolution. On the night before Eliza left her college, she stood in my doorway, just like I once stood outside my mother's. But she knocked, softly. "Come in," I called. She crossed the room and sat beside me on the bed. "I'm excited," she said, "but I'm scared too." I smiled gently. "That makes sense." She looked at me carefully. "Will you still need me when I'm gone?" The question startled me. "Of course I will," I said immediately. "You don't stop being my daughter because you grow up." She let out a breath she'd been holding. "I just didn't want to become background." The word hung between us. Background. I reached for her face, brushing her hair back. "You could never," I said firmly. "You are not background music in my life. You are part of the melody." She laughed softly. "That's poetic." "It's true." She leaned into me then, and I held her the way I once wished to be held without asking. "You can always knock," I whispered into her hair. "I know," she replied. And she did. The morning she drove away, I stood in the driveway long after the car disappeared. Adrian wrapped his arm around my waist. "You did good," he murmured. I watched the empty road. "No," I said quietly. "We did better." And in that subtle shift, from proving something to someone to building something with intention, I felt the final knot inside me loosen. If someone were to reduce my story to a headline, it would still read dramatically. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But the deeper truth is less sensational and far more meaningful. I was always loved, just not always in the language I needed. The will did not create love. It clarified regret. It acknowledged imbalance. It gave voice to something unsaid. And then it gave me a choice: to repeat or to rewrite. I rewrote. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And now when I look at my life, the laughter on the porch, the steady partnership beside me, the daughter who never dots her place, the brother who learned to stand without being carried, I don't see a story about favoritism. I see a story about growth, about fear confronted, about silence broken, about a woman who learned too late how to say what she felt, and a daughter who learned just in time how to say it sooner. My mother's favorite child wasn't me, until the will was read. But by the time it was, I no longer needed to win her love. I had already become someone who could receive it, forgive it, and transform it. And that, more than any inheritance, is the legacy that endures.